The year is 1162, and somewhere on the frozen, wind-battered plains of Mongolia, a child is born into a world that has absolutely no intention of letting him survive. A world of warring tribes, broken alliances, and merciless winters where the weak are left behind without a second thought, and where power is the only currency that truly matters. And this child, this small and fragile boy named Temujin, enters that brutal world with nothing but a heartbeat and a name given to him by a father who would not live long enough to see what his son would become. Because Yesugei, Temujin's father, was a respected chieftain of the Borjigin clan, a man of standing and influence on the steppes, but also a man with enemies, patient, vengeful enemies, who waited for their moment and found it one afternoon when Yesugei stopped to share a meal with a group of Tatar strangers on his way home from arranging his young son's betrothal. And those strangers recognized him, and they poisoned his food, and Yesugei rode away from that meal, not knowing he was already dying. And by the time the news reached young Temujin, his father was gone. And with him went every shield of protection the family had ever had, because the Borjigin clan, the very people bound by honor and blood to stand by the widow and her children, looked at Hulun and her young sons and made a cold, calculated decision to abandon them completely, leaving them on the open steppes with no food, no horses, no allies, and no future, casting them out like they were nothing. Like 9 years of a boy's life, and his father's years of loyalty to the clan meant absolutely nothing. And so Temujin, at the age of 9, found himself standing on the frozen earth with his mother and siblings, watching the only world he had ever known ride away from him without looking back. And what happened next is the part of this story that most history books rush through because it is uncomfortable, because it does not fit the polished image of a great conqueror, because it is simply the story of a starving family scraping roots and berries out of frozen ground just to stay alive one more day. And yet it is precisely this chapter, these years of cold and hunger and humiliation, that built Temujin into something the world had never seen before. Because suffering, when it does not destroy you, becomes the most powerful teacher alive. And Temujin was learning every single day, in ways that no palace education could ever replicate, learning what it felt like to be powerless, learning what loyalty truly meant by experiencing its complete absence, learning that survival was not a matter of birthright but of will, of intelligence, of the refusal to accept the fate that others had decided for you. And still the world was not finished testing him, because as a young teenager, conflict arose within his own struggling family over food and resources, and Temujin made a decision that revealed something frightening about the kind of man he was becoming. He was not passive. He was not a victim waiting for rescue. He was a young predator capable of decisive and irreversible action when pushed far enough. And the consequences of that action came swiftly, because a rival tribe called the Taichiut had been watching the family of Yesugei for years, waiting for the right moment to eliminate any threat before it could grow, and they descended on Temujin and captured him, locking a heavy wooden kangi around his neck and parading him through their camps as a slave, a trophy, a warning to anyone who dared to think that the son of a dead chieftain could ever amount to anything. And Temujin endured it, not passively, not with broken spirit, but with the sharp, calculating patience of someone who is storing every humiliation as fuel, studying every face, every weakness, every moment of guard being lowered. And then one night, during a festival when the camp was distracted and the guards were careless, he made his move. He used the kangi itself as a weapon. He ran into the freezing darkness. He submerged himself in an icy river with only his nose above the waterline, motionless and silent, while searchers passed within feet of him. And then he was gone, escaped, free again. And this is the moment where the story of Genghis Khan truly begins, because a man who has been a slave and chosen freedom, who has been humiliated and refused to stay broken, who has touched the very bottom of human experience and climbed back up with his own hands, that man carries a fire inside him that cannot be extinguished by any army or any enemy. And Temujin carried that fire back across the steppes to claim the one thing his father had arranged before his death, which was Borte, the young woman of the Ongirat tribe whom Temujin had been promised in marriage. And he went to her, and her family honored the agreement. And in claiming Borte, Temujin did something that his rivals on the steppes had not yet understood. He was not just taking a wife, He was forming his first political alliance, demonstrating to the world that he was a man of his word, that promises made by his family would be honored, even after years of chaos and exile. And Borta herself proved to be one of the greatest forces in his rise, a woman of remarkable intelligence, loyalty and political sharpness, who would stand beside him through everything that followed. And what followed was almost immediate catastrophe, because the Merkit tribe raided their camp and kidnapped Borte, seeking revenge for an old grievance against Temujin's father. And here is where Temujin made the decision that separated him from every other struggling young warrior on the steppes. He did not accept the loss. He did not move on. He called in every alliance he had, reached out to his blood brother Jamuga, and to a powerful lord named Togrul, assembled a fighting force, and attacked the Merkits and brought Borte home. And in doing so, he revealed his greatest gift, which was not his physical strength or his fearlessness in battle, but his extraordinary ability to inspire loyalty, to make men feel that following him was not a transaction, but a cause worth dying for. And warriors began to come to him from across the steppes, not because he was rich or noble, but because of something magnetic and rare in that world. He listened. He remembered names. He rewarded loyalty without reservation. He shared food and spoils equally. He promoted men based on what they could do, rather than what family they were born into. And in a culture rigidly defined by bloodlines and birth order, this was nothing short of revolutionary, and his power grew. And with his growing power came the inevitable collision with his old blood brother Jamuga, who was also building influence across the tribes, but who believed in the old ways, the old hierarchies, the old system where noble birth was everything. And the two men who had once ridden together as brothers now faced each other as rivals. Then Jamuga struck first, rallying clans against Temujin and defeating him in battle, forcing him to flee and regroup. And any other man might have taken that defeat as a sign from the universe to stop, to accept his limits, to find a quieter life. But Temujin studied that defeat the way a scholar studies a difficult text, identifying every mistake, every weakness, every lesson that loss had to offer. And he rebuilt, and when he returned, he was stronger and smarter and more dangerous than before. And the warriors kept coming to his banner, because even in defeat, Temujin had shown them something they could not find anywhere else. He did not break. He did not despair. He adapted, and that quality, that unbreakable adaptive will, is worth more than any army. And over the following years, Temujin moved with a combination of military brilliance, political genius, and sheer relentless momentum, uniting the Mongol tribes one by one, sometimes through battle, sometimes through negotiation, sometimes through acts of mercy and inclusion that stunned his enemies into submission, because he was not merely conquering. He was building, establishing laws that protected the common people, outlawing the enslavement of fellow Mongols, guaranteeing freedom of religion, creating a system of communication and governance that stretched across thousands of miles of open steppe, turning a collection of warring nomadic tribes into something that had never existed before, a unified Mongol nation. And then came the day that history still remembers, the year 1206, on the banks of the Onan River, where a great assembly called the Kurultai gathered every tribe and chieftain who had submitted to his authority, and the 9 white banners of Mongol unity were raised against the open sky. And the man who had been born into poverty, who had been abandoned on the frozen steppes, who had worn a slave's collar around his neck, who had hidden in an icy river to escape capture, who had lost battles and loved ones, and endured humiliations that would have shattered anyone else, that man stood before thousands of warriors kneeling in the dust and was declared Genghis Khan, universal ruler, Khan of Khans. And the roar that went up from that crowd on that day was not just the sound of men cheering a leader. It was the sound of history shifting, the sound of a world that had tried everything in its power to destroy one boy and had failed completely. Because Genghis Khan would go on to build the largest contiguous empire in the history of the human race, stretching from the Pacific coast of Asia to the doorstep of Europe, and he would do it not simply through violence, but through vision, protecting trade routes, connecting civilizations, allowing the free movement of ideas and people and goods across a world that had previously been fragmented and fearful. And when he died in 1227, he left behind not just conquest, but a legacy so vast and so complicated that historians are still arguing about it 8 centuries later. And what they keep coming back to, again and again, is not the battles or the body counts, but the sheer impossibility of the journey from a starving, abandoned 9-year-old on a frozen steppe to the ruler of half the known world, and the truth that this journey teaches us, the truth that echoes across every century between his time and ours, is that the most powerful force in human history is not wealth, not noble birth, not inherited armies or inherited thrones, but the will of a single human being who refuses, absolutely refuses, no matter what the world throws at them, to stop.